All right, good morning, folks. It's Chris Dagger right here for the Off Bishop Street podcast. Could you believe it? It's already episode 15, and I'm very happy and excited today to have a unique guest. And today I'm going to have Sami Rekik, and hopefully I pronounce his name correctly. So Sami Rekik is joining me today, and we're going to be talking about a couple things, especially with regards to Catholicism and you know his backstory, his bio, and basically his experience. Because from my understanding, Sami Rekik is Algerian, and he used to be Muslim. He converted to Christianity, and basically just the whole theological undertone or underlying explanation to that is super interesting to me, and to understand these types of stories. Having watched a couple of videos on YouTube about different testimonials, people bringing up their own stories, and understanding how that type of shift really influences someone's biography. So, Sami, good morning, and how's it going today?
Thank you very much. I'm very good. So yeah, as you said, just to rectify a little bit, my father is from Algeria. So I was born here in Canada, in Montreal. So I was raised here, and I was partly Muslim, but mostly cultural, not really religious for that part. So yeah.
That's an interesting thing, because a lot of people that I meet, and when we delve into talking about religion, that kind of thing, they start uh, differentiating between cultural religious, like cultural Jewish or cultural Islam, and more practical Jewish or Islam or religion that they may be practicing. So where do you draw the line? Like, how do you differentiate between cultural and practical?
I think the for Islam, it's more obvious when someone is practicing and when someone is only uh, doing it because of the culture and doing Ramadan and things like that. So it's mostly like in the language, in the food, or during Ramadan is a very important, also religious, but as well mostly cultural for most people who come to the Occidental world. So my father, when he left Algeria, he left exactly because of religious problems in his country, where there was a dramatic overtaking of very extremist Muslims, and they wanted to take over the government and over the cities. So that's the reason my father left Algeria. So when he came to Canada, he did not want to have anything else to do with religion, right? So I was raised in this sort of household where I never even heard the name of God. I didn't know anything about God, nothing. Not I never heard the name of Jesus Christ. Never have read the Bible. Never have gone to church. So when I say there's a difference between cultural and religious and Muslim or even Catholics, is I think it's pretty much in the practice to everyday, day-to-day practice of religious beliefs.
Right, and practice is one thing, but you also have the faith aspect of it, and sometimes just having that mustard seed of faith
Mhm.
inside someone can definitely change the way they behave, the way they see the life, the way you know the way their own personal philosophy actually plays out in a practical sense. And now, so your father kind of got disillusioned a little bit from Islam, and what about, like? And you mentioned something about your mother. So what did she? Was she Muslim? Was she Christian? Atheist?
Yeah. So my mother is half French, half Spanish.
Interesting. Okay.
And but because of my grandmother, she got into this kind of new age religion, and very yeah, new practices that my mother never really had faith in God, or she was baptized and everything, but as I said, this is mostly in her childhood and mostly cultural.
Hmm.
She did not do anything Christian after that. She did not worry about her religion or about God. She kind of followed in her mother's footstep for this. So I was really raised where my father did not want to hear anything about God in the house, and my mother was not especially talking about it. So yeah, I was raised in this way without knowing anything about religion.
So that's super interesting, because you know I would draw a parallel with a great evangelical Christian who passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago at the age of 34. He was an outspoken apostolic evangelist. His name is Nabil Qureshi.
Hmm.
You probably heard the name. He came from a very staunch Muslim Pakistani family, and he converted to Christianity during his years in med school, right? And then he, pursued a couple of graduate degrees in theology and became an apostolic evangelist in the Protestant faith and the, I think, more evangelical faith. And you hear all these different stories about different people that come from a Muslim family or a Muslim background,
Hmm.
and they go through a lot of hardships, when they convert, because a lot of times their social circle, and basically anything that is cultural in their background, like their cultural setting, uh, goes through this paradigm shift. And I was just wondering, like, was that the case for you? Did you feel any difficulties just transitioning from perhaps a diluted Muslim family over to like Christianity?
Well, of course, my conversion to Christianity came a lot later when I was like about 18, 19, and 20 years old. So it was more like of a sudden move, and my life, I was a little bit more mature and more free as a child. So first, I wanted to say that in it's we've come to a time and a society where it happens. Because 20 years ago when I was born, I grew in this society. I went to school. I did my studies. I worked there, and we have become a society where it is even normal not to know anything about religion, not to have
Right.
any sort of relationship with God. When I say this to my South American friends or even my Muslim family, they cannot believe, they would not believe that this is possible. Not to hear even the name of God is not something they can wrap their head around. It's not normal for them. So I think we have come to a very strange time in the Occidental world where this can happen, not to know anything. And so for when I went to school or with my friends and everything, I did not speak about God. So, and for my family, it was very not a subject of conversation. So the day I started speaking about God and the Bible and that I wanted to, I think I wanted to become Christian, they took this very reluctantly, and they were not very happy about it,
Right.
not very happy at all. So but on throughout the years, it kind of simmered down a bit. But yeah, at first it was very difficult. Yes.
So yeah, and from what I hear from what you're saying is basically like the disappointment came from a different angle, right? Because it seems to me that having grown up in a family where religion was actually cast aside
Hmm.
for the most part, well, now that you're actually swinging back towards religion, but from the Christian perspective, yeah, that must have caused quite the quite not I wouldn't say quite the shock, but quite the disturbance, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
But what prompted you basically to where was the first, or when was the first introduction to Christianity
Hmm.
in your life?
So I always liked to read philosophy and history. So I kind of knew there was something with the church here in Canada, in with La Nouvelle France, and I kind of knew there were everybody who wrote philosophy and wrote about history during this time, during the 17th, 18th century. They were all Christians, right? Or at least they had a notion of it, and they always spoke about it. So I kind of did not understand, because I was in a world where it is normal not to know anything about God. So I loved reading philosophy. And I remember very clearly the first time I was introduced to apologetic, that's how we say it, right?
Apologetics,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
apologetics, Christian apologetics, was reading the Les Pensées de Blaise Pascal. So I don't know what the name in English, but I guess it's like his thoughts or his ideas.
Right.
So that was the first time I was introduced to an argument on God and on Jesus Christ and on the church, for the church. So it was at least for God. So it was really with Blaise Pascal during summer 2019 during this time. So yeah.
So okay, so and I know Blaise Pascal from a mathematical point of view because I looked at his contributions to the world of mathematics. I can remember that sort of pyramid that he kind of drew out with numbers when it comes to statistics, and it's far off in my memory. But I do remember him from a mathematical point of view. But it's interesting to see how him and another one of his French counterparts, Rene Descartes, actually had philosophical contributions aside from their
Mathematics.
mathematical innovations.
Yeah.
So let's just pull back the curtain a little bit and rewind. So your father went through some sort of massive revolution in or
There was
Muslim extremism.
terrorist. There
Yeah,
was like terrorism in his country where we don't exactly know which group it was, but there was a very violent terrors during the night. A village could be completely wiped out, and people got assassinated on the street, murdered on the street. So it was. So he left because there was a lot of turmoil because of religion.
right. And did that start when he was around, or did it was it already something that was happening before he was
No, it kind of started when he was around. It was always a bit uneasy,
right?
but during this time, it was when he left, it was starting to become very violent. Yeah,
I see. And I'm guessing that's why he fled the country and came over here to
yeah,
restart over.
exactly. And in Algeria, there was the French university were there for a long time. Even after the country became independent, the French university stayed at least a few decades after this. And my father studied in French university, so he had sort of a European culture and at least a European mind for thinking and studying. So for him, it was only natural to come work to France or Canada.
Mhm.
So he spoke French very well, and he wasn't like most of Algerians we see today that come more from uneducated families and they don't really speak the language, and it's difficult to get in here in the country and yeah. So yeah, my father when he came here, I always had this type of European thinking and cultural setting in my home. It was normal, and because of my mom as well. Yeah,
Right, because you grew up here basically, and you
yeah.
and it's it's very interesting that you're highlighting a point that I want to focus on. The lack of religiosity in the landscape is definitely phenomenal because I TA'd a couple of classes here in theological studies during my master's degree, and I'm almost done. I finished 2 years thus far writing my thesis at the end of the summer, or it should be done by the end of the summer. And when I TA'd certain classes, like the level of disconnect, and I'm not coming from a judgmental point of view. It's just that I feel, or I kind of saw like the level of or the lack of knowledge when it comes to religion and the contributions that religion has to our culture. That kind of makes me sad because when um when I was growing up, as a kid, and um I was learning about just proper morality and um human behavior. Religion was a central part of my upbringing, especially through my mother and my father for a lot, but mostly through my mother. And everything that we did and every action that we took had a religious backing to it.
Hmm.
What I mean by that is, if I were to make a decision in a conflicted situation or conflictual situation, I would look at it from a point of view where, okay, I know what I want, but what does God want?
Mm.
Right? So we did have that, Christian morality undertone in everything that we did. And to see the fact that, you know, religion has been really, really, cast to the side in modern Occidental society, it's kind of disheartening. And now we see like different things that are unfolding, especially societally, because again, philosophy converts itself to behavior, right? What you think becomes what you do. So, yeah,
And
it's a weird thing.
I think it's the first time since the apostles evangelized Europe. I think it's the first time in history that we see this in Occidental world. It's very weird, and we don't know how to react.
Mhm.
We don't know what to do, how to work through that, and yeah, it's difficult time.
Well, sometimes, yeah, that's the thing. So when people don't know what to do and don't know how to react, um, from a religious point of view, would people want to look toward God for guidance, right? Or how should they look toward God for? So, are these questions, given your interest in the philosophy, like, are these questions that you ask yourself on a regular basis? Like, okay, well, if I'm wrestling with a different, a particular context, and I have this difficulty, and I don't understand where the world is going, not only does that cause anxiety, I know people that
Hmm.
are very anxious from a societal point of view beyond the individual, and they're like, okay, well, what's going on with the world? And that starts affecting them individually.
Yeah.
I personally know people like that. I'm wondering if you've had that thought process where, okay, well, now that I've converted to Christianity, and now that I see the world in a different lens, I'm not sure if you do. Um, do you feel any anxiety with regards to where the world is headed?
Well, actually, no, and I don't share. I know a lot of people are very anxious about the war and the climate and things like this, but I just cannot feel it. I don't know. I feel like my faith is in God is doesn't matter what happens because I believe in eternal life. I believe in eternity, and I believe that my God is eternal. So not only my God, but God, the creator of everything. So I just cannot feel the anxiety, but I can understand it because before I converted, I always was in sort of a of a search for meaning and a search for something more profound and something more important than what we were told and taught. So I can understand that when someone doesn't believe in anything bigger than themselves and bigger than the world, they must feel in front like they're flying over a void and that anytime they could fall in.
Hmm.
I feel like if we don't have a solid um, base in God and in something more powerful, we are lost and we don't know the meaning of anything. Why do we live? Why do we go there? Why do we work? And in if you look in the statistics here in Quebec, there's one of it's the place where the one of the country where most suicides happen
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Well,
In Quebec.
I I've heard that before as well. Yeah.
Most of suicides are here. So we have come to something not only new that the society doesn't have a basis or at least a Christian background, but something dangerous because people fall in depression and they kill themselves for lack of meaning and of suffering and because of all this. So I think Christianity is not only a personal search; it's something important for our society and our people.
Hmm. And when we go back to the 1960s, you probably heard about the Quiet Revolution here in Quebec, and how you know that was the major turning point where Quebec really turned on its head. And coincidentally, it happened during the sexual revolution in the United States, and a whole bunch of different movements in the 60s and 70s, where you know people were starting to fear just the increase of debauchery,
Hmm.
right, and that kind of thing. And now, fast forward in 2023, 73 years later, we look at just the level of insanity that's going on in the world, to the point where folks that are perpetrating these insanities are not even recognizing that we are living in an insane era right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
So that, and then I can't help but inject my own opinion when it comes to that, because I do believe that we are wrestling with a lot of um, bad forces and debauchery and these kind of types of things. So at the point where you chose to basically convert to Christianity and adopt it as your faith, um, what exactly did you feel? Did you feel a sense of relief, a burden, a mission?
Well, so it's a bit more complicated than this because, as I said, when I first read the Blaise Pascal,
Hmm.
I realized I there was something, and I wanted to know more about God and about Jesus Christ. It was the first time I heard the name of Jesus Christ.
Right.
It was the first time I understood what the church was and the religion. I at least had a sort of understanding of it. So after this, my life continued, but kept searching in a more focused way on Jesus Christ and on the Bible. And um, a friend of mine gave me a Bible, and she was Protestant, so I used to go a little bit at her church and with her pastor, and for me it was really weird, and I did not feel I did not feel it. I did not understand what the Bible and this had in common. I could not see it, and for me, for a time, Protestantism was like Christianity without salt, without savor.
Hmm.
I don't know how we say this, but without taste.
Yeah, without a flavor to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Substance.
yeah, exactly. So I kind of was kept searching, and when I started reading the Bible, every day I read the Bible, and I started praying. This is really the start of a personal relationship with God and with Jesus Christ. So I started praying, and now I kind of felt there was, for my whole life, there was a sort of a void inside me. I was wanted to fill it with something, with someone, with love, with anything. But when I started praying, this void was filled
Hmm.
with God, with His presence. So all my sort of anxiety and me running around everywhere to find something to fill this void inside me was in an instant it was gone. I was with God. So yeah, and I think a lot of people would benefit at least to try praying at least once.
Right. So you did mention Les Pascal, and you did mention like the benefits of praying, as you just did. Um, Now we do have a point in common, which I kind of discovered, several days ago when we had this conversation about you coming over to the podcast. We both went to McGill.
Yeah,
Actually, I've been to I'm mostly a Concordian. I did my bachelor's at Concordia, went 2 years to McGill to do some certificates, and came back here for a master's. So what did you study at McGill?
political science.
Political
Yeah.
science, and I'm guessing that's when you started to delve into these different subject materials and asking yourself these different questions.
Yeah, right. So in political science, we study a lot of philosophy,
Right.
right? And political philosophy, of course. So I had a professor, which I think he did not even notice he was doing this, but he gave us like, I don't know, like 5 out of 7 books were Catholics, like Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Augustine, Saint John of Canterbury. They were like those church fathers and pillars of the church that we were reading. And for the first time, I read this kind of material.
Right.
Never have had I done this before. So and I kept, during this time, I kept praying and reading the Bible. So I was really starting to have a Christian mind and a Christian life and belief. But I did not go to church yet. I was not at that point. So uh, during university, without even the professors meaning to, I converted even more to Catholicism, to Christianity, because I read wonderful works, and I think it was, at least for my intellectual mind, I think it was the best years. It was very good. I even read the Confession of Saint Augustine during my time in McGill
Hmm.
University with the Newman Center, actually. So yeah, political science.
And did you ever have any political ambitions for the future, having that political science undergrad?
So yeah, that's kind of my real conversion came, because I wanted to be a politician and look good around in the world and for the people, and I wanted to be well seen, and I wanted people to admire me. So it was, even though I wanted to be Christian, I was still very much in the world, in the mind of the world. And I was implicated in a political party to push. Of course, I was Christian, so I wanted to be Christian, so I pushed Christian ideas in the political sphere. But still, it was not a real, like a profound and life changing conversion during this time. It was still in only intellectual, not really spiritual yet.
Hmm. I do see, I can tell from what you're telling me, well, from your story, that the segue really went from basically not having a sense of direction, and then you know diving into an intellectually driven tunnel before actually reaching a spiritual, I wouldn't say enlightenment, but at least a spiritual spark
Yeah.
in your trajectory to actually start, adopting the Christian faith the more in full throttle. And I personally I try to encourage people to um, connect to God, whatever their faith may be. Even though I am a Christian, I'm not. I would never, force Christianity upon anybody. And I've had folks here on the podcast that were from Sikh backgrounds, Hindu backgrounds, Jewish, and you know, having been to Thailand, last summer, I really admire the level of piety that people may have in their respective religions. Um, Obviously, I'm a very ecumenical person, even though Pope Pius XI would really hate me for it. But yeah, I think having that religiosity or faith in something higher than the self is very important. So, given that you got involved with a political party and that you wanted to basically um, be selfless in that regard, um, at a certain point you had to leap from Protestantism to Catholicism. So, what exactly motivated that transition?
So I was never really Protestant. Because my friend would go to church and she would like try to bring me to church, to her Protestant church as
Was it
well.
evangelical,
It was
Lutheran,
a Pentecostal, so
Pentecostal?
yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So I did go sometimes, but I really did not feel any that I was part of their church. I would never say I was Protestant, even though I went to Protestant church. So I kept I was really just on an intellectual path and in search of God and Jesus and learning the Bible. But what is really like started my conversion to Catholicism, to the Catholic Church, was, as you know, I really liked reading Blaise Pascal, and I started reading his biography written by his sister. So after he died, so I read this, and Blaise Pascal, as you mentioned, is a great mathematician, a great scientist, and he could do anything in the world. He spoke with the king and the the high nobility of France, and he was a very well regarded person because of his mathematical intelligence and everything. So, but when he read the spiritual works of a Christian, of a Catholic writings, for, in an instant he converted. He didn't want to do anything else about mathematics.
Really?
He
Wow.
wanted to focus everything on Jesus Christ.
I did not know that. Like I guess I'm not familiar with his biography, but to have that momentum shift in such a short time frame, it's interesting.
Yeah, like he read this book, these books actually, and at this moment precisely, he left everything about maths and science and everything, and he focused on Christ. So there's like two parts in his life. One more scientific, and he invented like the Pascaline, the calculator, sorry, and everything. And then there's more philosophical works about Christianity. So when I read this conversion, I thought I was a bit in the same, not as a not as a genius as him, but I was in a bit of the same process as him, because I wanted to do good in politics and everything, but I did not convert yet. And when I read this, I thought, wow, there's something. Even if this man, who's a absolute genius, can convert like this, from not everything to nothing, I thought maybe I should look into it.
Right.
Maybe I should try too. Like,
So,
who am I to say no to God?
but what exactly did he read that really changed his mind?
So it's writings of a noble Frenchman, Saint-Cyran, le Duc de Saint-Cyran, or I don't know exactly what his title is. I never read it. I don't think we know. I don't think we have much of his work today, but I don't know exactly what it is. But it must be really good if he converted. But yeah, I don't know. I never read it. Les Écrits de Saint-Cyran. That's how it's called.
Les Écrits de Saint-Cyr. Okay, yeah, I could probably look that up as we're speaking here. So I'm just going to type in Blaise Pascal conversion to just look at it because a little bit more in depth here on the podcast to see like what exactly this guy went through. And the thing is, when people say that they converted to a particular faith, I'm kind of reticent to believe them because I would be thinking that, let's say, Blaise Pascal was already a Catholic. It's just that he was so in depth with his scientific involvements that he perhaps was a diluted or washed up particular Catholic. Because I would have a hard time believing that
Right.
Blaise Pascal was not a Catholic. I think unless he was,
So of course,
yeah,
in this time, as I said, in France at that time, everybody was Catholic. It
right,
was not a question of course, he was Catholic. He was baptized and everything. But he focused so much, especially in this time in the nobility, was not very common for people to really practice their like very piously their faith. So it was more of
cultural,
something, yeah,
yeah,
cultural. So Blaise Pascal, when he, of course, he was Christian, but and during this time it was also the Protestant Reform
hmm,
with Luther and Calvin. So he was in this sort of debate all in the society where it was for the church against the church, but still always about God. So, but Blaise Pascal, he focused everything on mathematics. He even said that mathematics have every answer and you don't need anything else.
hmm,
So it was this type of conversion. He found in the writings of Saint Cyran that God is everything.
right.
He created mathematics. He created the numbers. So so that's why he changed his life around. Right. So when I read this, I thought too, yes, I want to be Catholic now. Because I was certain, even though if Blaise Pascal is not exactly like pointing toward the Catholic Church, he was, of course, Christian, and but it's not exactly clear. If he would not exactly say you should be Catholics and everything, but at least Christian. But for me, I did not know at the time, and it made no difference. For me, a Frenchman in the 17th century was Catholic, right?
Right. I mean, some people were probably like closeted atheists or closeted agnostics, but again, like it was in the cultural landscape of the time, it was, especially in Christendom, it was hard for someone to stick out like a Richard
Yeah,
Dawkins
yeah,
and be a staunch atheist, right?
yeah, exactly. So when I read this,
By the way, are you cold right now
no,
or
no,
are
I'm
you good?
perfect.
Okay. All right.
So
The window's open. Anyway.
I I I I started going to church to mass in the year 2020. So during the pandemic, the COVID. So when the church everything was closed down for a few months, a few weeks at least, and then when they reopened, that's where I first went to mass for first time in my life. And honestly, I did not know anything. I did not understand anything, but I kept going and going every day. I would go to mass even without knowing what was going on. And one day I understood that the Eucharist, the communion, was the body of Jesus Christ, and I could not take it before having been baptized.
Right.
So I asked the priest to be baptized.
And a first communion also. Like,
Yeah, first
yeah.
communion and confirmation and everything. So I asked the priest to receive the sacraments, right? So during I kept going to church, and during 8 months I did my catechumenal time with the church. And during the year 2021, I was baptized and confirmed in the Catholic Church. I was still studying at McGill in political science, but I felt like something was missing. I
Hmm.
felt like it was not enough. I, I, I and even though I had good courses with good professors, some others were just profoundly atheist and very against the religion and against God, and it was very difficult for me to work on this and provide like time to read these books. I read Voltaire, which is perfectly against the church, and for me it was very difficult to keep going in this path of political science in McGill. So I started taking courses in theology and in theology and also in philosophy at the Newman Center with Saint Augustine,
Hmm.
with the Confession of Saint Augustine. So when I took these courses, I was really a Christian and Catholic, and this opened my faith really. When I read the Confession of Saint Augustine, it was like when a flower opens up to the sun.
Right.
For me, my faith really blew up at this time. I, I saw so many ways you could follow and you could grow in faith and in relationship with God. So for me, this was a during the time of this course on Saint Augustine, it was very a philosophical, because it was a philosophy course. So I really opened up to faith, and I wanted more. I wanted to know more about
Right.
Catholic Church.
Is there anything that you're reading right now to feed that thirst or
Yeah,
quench that thirst?
I will talk about it a little bit later because it's very important
Right.
what I'm reading right now. So so at this time I wanted to go study theology.
Hmm.
I had a friend who knew someone at the Grand Séminaire de Montréal, and he told me, you can study theology in the seminary. So I thought, well, okay, that could be good. It's the church; they will defend the faith, and will be good theological courses. So for 1 year, I went to study at this Grand Séminaire de Montréal in theology as an external student.
That was after your undergrad. You already graduated the.
I did 2 years and then I
Oh, I
left.
see. Okay. Right.
I could not continue anymore.
Hmm.
There was like a complete blockage for me. I could not go through.
Right.
And so I went to the great I don't know in English seminary,
Yeah, the Grand Seminary,
Grand
the
Seminary.
Montreal Grand Seminary.
Yeah. So I went and studied there for 1 year, and during this time, of course, I met seminarians, priests, religious sisters, and even monks and everything. So I never thought about being priest
Hmm.
before. I never thought about this, but now I met these people that always, each one of them had a vocation, a story, and a way they felt the call to become what they are. So for the first time, I started asking myself questions about if I should become priest but I never spoke about it to anyone, never. And it happened that during the time, during I think a week, in the time span of a week, three people, which I were completely unknown to me. I did not know any of them. Three people came to me and said, "You should be a priest."
Interesting. Okay.
Out of nowhere, I did not know them. So I thought maybe that's a little weird. Weird, at least. I don't base everything on this, but it's a little weird.
It's a coincidence.
It's a weird coincidence, yeah.
Right.
So, and after this, I went on a retreat at the Sanctuaire Marie Reine des Cœurs in Chertsey, and
With Father Ebode, right?
yeah, well, it was not him at the time,
Oh, okay.
but I went there during a retreat with a few members of the seminary, and there as we were, there's like different chapels on the mountain, and as we were praying the rosary, we visiting the different chapels, we went to the highest one on the mountain, and in this chapel there is a statue of the Virgin Mary holding the infant Jesus in her arms, and there's Saint Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort who offers his heart to the Virgin Mary, and as we were praying the rosary in front of this statue, we were kneeling, and in like I can remember this in like a perfect moment, in an instant, in a second. I thought I felt like I have to say yes. It was like a great emotion on me, and I saw the child Jesus in the arms of Mary, and I thought, if I want to live as well this love that he receives from his mother, I have to say yes to be in the arms of Mary as Jesus is. I have to give my heart to Mary, to the Virgin Mary. So at this time, I don't know, like I felt something, and it was very powerful, and I knew at this time I said yes to become priest. It's very memorable moment for me. So after this, I did The everything had to be done. I spoke with the vocational director in the diocese, and I did my all the process and everything to enter seminary. So I mean, during the first year of propedeutic year is just before entering seminary.
I was looking up the definition actually because I was wondering what propédeutique would translate to English. In English, it says "and soon," right? As you can read it right there.
I don't
So
know.
propédeutique in oh, it says Latin. So I probably picked the wrong language. So if we pick like
French.
French,
So those
yeah,
who study in their masters they will know this word because they have to do this if there's not the same.
propédeutic. Okay, it's very
It's
basic.
a university term that students in their master or doctorate will know this word if they have done it. So it's the same. It's like a a foundation for at least in the diocese they call it the foundational year or something like that, so that you can really enter in the life of a priest and with the prayer and the mass and everything every day. So you have to get in the rhythm before really starting to study and going through the process. And during this year, as I said, I wanted to speak about a book that I've been reading since the start of the year. It's called Insinu Jesu. It's in Latin. It
Right.
means in the on the uh, chest of God, on the heart of God,
Hmm.
of Jesus at least. And during this year, I started reading this book, and it's a American monk, Benedict monk, who, in front of the Holy Sacrament, uh, hears the voice of Jesus. So all throughout this book, it's him writing what Jesus tells him, and it's like the developing the devotion to this to the Eucharistic heart of Jesus.
Hmm.
And with this book, I really felt I read it every day, really slowly, one page at a time. And we every day we do adoration in the cathedral in our program, and it's I really found that in the heart of Jesus, pierced by the spear, and his Eucharistic heart, there lies the vocation of a priest. It's it's the it's the sacerdoce, the
Right.
sacrifice of the heart of Jesus. And I started really uh, loving adoration, Eucharistic adoration. I want to do it every day, and I cannot take my eyes off his Eucharistic heart when I'm in front of him. It's the most wonderful thing. And what he writes here, if if there are Catholics who will listen to this, I really suggest they read this. It's a wonderful book for adoration. And Jesus in the Bible, he says, "I am the door. I am uh, the way, the truth, and the life."
Hmm.
And for me, this door is the door. He is the door, but the door to his heart, the door to the priesthood, and the door to eternal life. For me, it's Eucharistic. It's his Eucharistic heart. So I develop a great devotion to the heart of Jesus, Sacred Heart of Jesus, with during this year, and I I hope that the priests too develop this devotion because it's a really a personal relationship that we have with God. Everybody should try it's like a friend, you know. God is like a friend. If you don't pass time with him, how will you know him? You have to have good times with him, and yeah. So I wanted to speak about this.
It's. I mean, it's. I really like the cover, and you definitely you see Jesus in front of a chalice in this particular icon or photo, and there's this lady leaning onto him.
It's Saint Jean,
Oh,
Saint
that's
John,
sorry. Yeah,
Saint John.
that's. See, yeah. So Saint John the Evangelist or the beloved disciple is, for some reason, often portrayed in such a feminine way, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I don't know. I
And
don't know.
even in Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, you would notice that Saint John, like sometimes they mistake Saint John with Mary Magdalene,
Yeah,
which I don't know if that it's probably completely erroneous to make that assumption. So you have Saint John the Evangelist. leaning onto him. And
Hang
but
on to his heart.
what exactly is Saint John the Evangelist? Now that we're talking about him, why is he the beloved disciple? I've never understood that.
Because he's the only one who stayed at the foot of the cross. He's the only one who stayed throughout the whole uh, torture of Jesus. He's the only one who stayed during his crucifixion. He never fled.
So he gained that title, the beloved, after the
I don't
whole.
think so, because even before his martyrdom, he was, as you see in the picture, he was leaning on the heart of Jesus. He
Mhm.
listened to his heart. He
Right.
listened to the word of his heart. He, I think he had a he Jesus want I think Jesus wanted to tell the apostles and all his disciples that they have to listen like Saint John did. And if you remember in the Bible, after his resurrection, Saint Thomas puts his fingers in the heart of Jesus. So he could not listen to him, but he could touch his heart. That's how he gained faith. That's how he believed in his resurrection. Saint John didn't need to believe in the resurrection. He believed in Jesus before he was even crucified.
That's incredible. And yeah, I think that's a distinguishing trait when you compare St. John to, for instance, St. Peter, who denied Christ 3 times right about when Christ was going to get crucified, or
When he
because
was judged, yeah.
when he was judged, right? And yeah, I've read the New Testament cover to cover, but it's been a while, and I do remember St. Thomas touching the places where Jesus got the received nails into his body to hang him on the cross, and Thomas needed to touch to actually believe, because and that's where the expression doubting Thomas comes from.
Yeah,
When people are doubting Thomases, they really need factual evidence or
yeah,
empirical evidence
exactly.
to look at it. Who's the Benedictine monk that?
Well, we don't really know. He never wanted to reveal his name, but because I have some friends who know him, he founded a monastery in Ireland, which I forgot the name of the place, but he founded a monastery of a Benedictine monastery, and it's really a lot of new vocation, and it's really working very well, and it's centered on the Eucharistic heart of Jesus, on adoration. I think he, I think he's onto something with something we have to discover for each one of ourselves to really at least Catholics will try to understand, but in during the mass, it's the highest and the most powerful moment of the crucifixion of Jesus, done for the glory and for the for his mercy on us for our sins. But during adoration, it's the continuous vision of this moment of his pierced heart. And you know, there was a lot of Eucharistic miracles where the host started bleeding.
Yeah, I never understood that. Like, it's because I look, I'm from a scientific background. Yes, I did grow up Christian, but like when a host, a wafer starts bleeding, like, how do you explain that?
I don't think you can.
You can't. It's a mystery, right?
I think it's just God reminds us that He is really present in the sacrament, and not only is He present, but in the scientific research that has been done on these hosts that started bleeding, it's always a part of the heart, blood directly in the heart, or at least even tissue from the heart. So it's we cannot see it only in the scientific vision, because it's not it's not that it's something else. It's more, it's different. I don't think we can understand it completely, but it just Jesus reminds us that the Eucharistic is not only his body, it's his heart, and everything is in his heart, and he
Hmm.
speaks to us in his heart. And for a priest, I think it's very important that when he does celebrates mass, that he understands the perfect sacrifice he's about to do, because we cannot understand how God sacrifices himself for us.
Right,
I don't understand,
right,
but
right.
he does it every day.
So in what countries or in what places have we seen that Eucharist bleeding?
All over the world, in Italy, in Mexico, in Argentina, and I don't know if in the United States it happened, but probably in, yeah, many places in the world.
So it's like a common recurring event that would happen where you would see that particular. And I've heard about similar miracles just to draw on that particular topic, where statues of the Virgin Mary would start
Started crying,
crying or
yeah, yeah.
something, and we see that at different places as well.
You know, I never experienced any of this, and I wouldn't say like to only search for this because it's not the center of the faith. But if it happens and it converts people and people start confessing and being more fervent, then I would not say it's bad. Even if it's not true, but I hope it's true. So you have to see the outcome. He says in the Bible, you will recognize the tree by its fruits.
Right.
So like the apparition of the Virgin Mary of Guadalupe in Mexico,
Hmm.
this it converted millions and millions to Catholicism. I mean, how is this possible just for human to do? No, it's something only God can do, and the Virgin Mary. And speaking of Saint John, Jesus gave him his mother when he was on the cross, and he gave his mother Saint John as a son. So this is even more for priests, but for everybody, it's very important to understand that Mary is our mother. She is really there for us and protects us. And as I told it for my vocational when in the chapel, what happened for me, Mary is the one who called me to priesthood. So I hope I always pray the rosary every day because it's her. She's like really like a mother with a child. She accompanies us every day. Every day she's there to guide us and protect us. For a Catholic, I know it's hard for Protestant to understand this, but for Catholic, it's really Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary is someone very important in our faith. So yeah, I hope every priest will rely on Mary and Saint John and the Eucharistic heart of Jesus.
And when I recall the last time we spoke, I was at this discernment meeting
Yeah.
with a whole bunch of guys, and there was Father Dominic Richet
Mm-hmm.
who shared his testimony and his experience on his journey toward the priesthood. A guy from Saint Jerome, he's a butcher, 19 years old, not very educated, and then basically he knew that he wanted to dedicate himself to the priesthood, just didn't know how. He didn't he perhaps thought that he didn't have the intellectual abilities to
Mm.
do so. But then now he's leading a church in LaSalle. He's a very successful priest, from what he told us. And I remember that evening, we I think we talked about marriage, like the different vocations, either getting married or celibacy in the priesthood. And Matei, well, one of your friends, a former Orthodox Christian
Mm-hmm.
that transitioned to the Catholic faith, he gave me some sort of explanation, and even some of the guys in that roundtable discussion told me about the level of work that comes with the priesthood and why it's preferable for them
Mm-hmm.
to remain celibate rather than getting married. Because prior to the 12th century, priests were getting married, but for some political or bureaucratic
Well, they were
reasons,
not all getting married, but some of them, yeah.
some of them, and then I think in Roman Catholicism they kind of set their foot down and made a decision back in the 12th century
Yeah.
that priests wouldn't get married from now on,
Mm-hmm.
and because of priests delegating the priesthood key over to their sons
Yeah.
and just having that father to son delegation of power. Um, did you ever ask yourself that question where, like, okay, if I'm going to become a priest
Mm-hmm.
and I know that one of the parameters is I can't
Celibacy.
get married
Yeah.
unless you're in the Eastern Rite, which
Yeah.
is a different ball game. Um, but did you have to like grapple with that at all?
Yeah, of course, it's something we all ask ourselves, right?
Right.
But one thing that is important to understand that even in the Eastern Byzantine Church, even deacons here in the Roman Church can get married. But what we have to remember is that if you're a priest or a deacon married, you still have to be chaste. You cannot have relation with your wife. It's in the canon law of the church. You have to remain chaste. So yeah, you will share a life with your wife and your children, and this will be beautiful. But it's still very difficult. I think even more difficult since you live with her, with your wife.
What does remaining chaste mean? Because it's that type of language is very foreign to
Yeah.
our modern
So
fornicating world.
meaning you can have sex. You cannot
Interesting.
have sex.
Interesting.
So right, and not just like one day or no, never.
Well, you can have children, but you just can't.
So for example, when in the Greek Byzantine Church, a priest before they become priests, they have to be married. At least I think 10 years or so. So they have to be married, and during this time they can have children. But if the husband decides he wants to become priest with the accord of his wife and everything, then he has to remain chaste after this. He cannot no longer have relation with his wife.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't know, and
Yeah.
even in the church, it's not clear. But the canon law is very clear. You cannot have relationship. Even deacons, when they become they receive ordination, they can no longer have relationship with their wives, with their wife. So and so that's just for the clarification. But for a priest, of course, who in the Roman Church who is perfectly celibate, who doesn't share his life with a woman or family, it's something different. Uh, no, not only does he not have any relationship, sexual relationship, but also he has to live his life like alone, right? Has to remain alone and doesn't have anybody to share the burden of his day and everything. But that's why it's even more important for Roman priests to to develop a relationship with the heart of Jesus,
Hmm.
with the sacred heart of Jesus, to speak to Jesus through his heart. He has eternal love in his heart. So it's not only a romantic discourse, but it's something like important. If I don't spend time with in adoration in front of the Eucharist or in front of the tabernacle, my day is just feel like I'm missing something. I have to be with Jesus at least a little bit during the day. Otherwise, how can I go on? Celibacy is something very difficult in today's world. We all feel very alone, lonely because of the way, especially here in Canada, we are a very independent society, very individual society
Yeah.
where there's no family bonds and in other cultures, at least even in Italy, the priests have like his mother and sisters with him in the presbytery and helping him cook and clean and everything. So at least he's not alone. But here in Occident and in Canada, is you're very lonely as a priest. So you have I think there's two things that are important. The first is the fraternity between priests, and then well, first is of course the other way around, but you have to develop fraternity and friendship with other priests to have good friends and good relation and profound relation, not only on the surface, but really profound friendship. And also of course develop a prayer life with Jesus and speak to him and ask him and rely on him. How can you go on in this world, in this life, if you don't rely on something bigger, something more powerful, someone more powerful, right?
Right. There definitely is a deficiency of priests, especially in Quebec. Like it went from a society where you had a grand seminary, a massive, massive
Yeah.
building near Montreal College down in downtown, where now the Grand Seminary is actually a smaller building. And I'm pretty sure that from a logistics point of view, it's to accommodate you know lesser quantity of people,
Hmm.
lesser amount of people. So when you look at the lack of priests and the need for more priests, I mean, obviously church attendance has been took a nosedive in the past decades. But how could I ask this question? You know, I can't help but ask when we talk about priesthood, all the scandals. that we hear about, and you're definitely familiar with this.
Hmm.
I want to know your take on it. Like, what exactly is your perspective on everything that we hear
Uh,
about priests and all the sexual scandals?
about the scandals or about the lack of vocation?
You know what? Yeah, I kind of intertwine both together, and that's my fault. Um, let's look at the scandals first, and then we could perhaps
Okay.
address the lack of vocations
So what do I think of it? Well,
because we hear about it a lot, right? So
yeah, like first of all, it's bad. It's really sad and against anything that the church can protect. It's not something good. If it's like a complete break of breaking of faith and of the law of the church and of law of natural law. It's something like if it happens, it's something very sad. So that's for this. But after that, of course, you know, it's like the all the light is on the church and the priest, but I think the numbers are even worse in the schools and in other places as such. So I think in Quebec here it was also a very societal problems. You know, it happened in the families, the fathers and the uncles and everything. A lot of people here can tell you testimonies that in their family it happened not because of the priest, but because of their members of family members. I think there was a real. I don't know exactly how. I'm not a psychologist or psychoanalyst. I don't know exactly what can cause this, but I think there was a societal problem, especially here in Quebec, where it happened a lot. And now, of course, it doesn't happen nearly as much, and I hope it never happens again in the church. But for as for priests, I think, as I said, you can go, you can go a really dark path if you don't rely on Jesus. If you don't, because we are alone, we don't share. If we like, how can I say this? Push everybody away and we stay in our little corner and we can go really dark back because we don't speak with anyone and there's nobody to come talk to us and see if we're okay because priests are not only alone but people don't really come to see if they're okay, right? So that's a problem. So yeah, I don't for me it never like was an issue, like not an issue, but a blockage or a stop for me to become priest. I don't really see the relationship between these two things, the scandals and becoming a priest. But I can see how people are angry with priests because of what happened, and
right,
there's a lot of media on light on this, and
yeah.
medias are very very speaking about it over and over again.
And the media is very vicious as
Vicious,
well.
yeah.
They don't have good intents.
No, no, exactly. So, yeah, media will always try to attack the church in whatever way they can. So, what better way for than a sexual scandal? A sexual scandal is a place where priests vowed not to enter. Right, right. Is they should not they remain chaste. That's their vow. So, of course, when it comes to light, everybody's a bit curious about it, and especially if it happens even worse with childrens and things like that. So, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, just recently, just given the fact that I take the metro to get here, to get the subway, and then sometimes I use my car, but for school purposes, I often take the metro, and I look at the Trons, and the Trons oftentimes you have the news, and I don't remember the outlets, either LCN or RDI, and like just recently, I heard about Cardinal Mark Ouellet,
Hmm.
and the news, the story that broke out a couple of months ago, when it comes to again like this
Hmm.
obsession that the media has uh, on just juxtaposing sexual allegations onto clergy members. Um, I, from my perspective, it really sets a true impediment. Whether the person is guilty of it or not, everybody takes the stain
Yeah, that's
for
the
some
thing.
reason. Yeah.
Because even though even if it's not true, because it's only allegation, so nothing has been confirmed or has not been judged yet. So even if it's not true, the image of the person is destroyed.
Right, and of the profession
Yeah,
of a priest.
right.
Right.
So it's very we have to be extremely careful because the smallest of things can bring down someone very quickly, and And yeah, I think we have to be careful of the media in general, that with the way they phrase things and the way they show what happened. They are biased, of course, against the church. There's no doubt about this. So I think people have to be a little careful when they read news like this, and they have to really ask questions and see if it's really true. Yeah.
Why are they so staunchly against the church?
Oh, that's a big question.
The media, the journalism, and all that. Like, why that stance? Yeah.
I have my personal opinion, but I think I will try to be like neutral about this, but the church uh, is very powerful in the terms of how many people are Catholics.
Right.
So even though if the church wants it or not is not important, she has a political power. The church has a political power, but the amount of people who are Catholics. So here in Quebec, it used to be 99% of the population that was Catholic.
Really?
Yeah, it
Wow.
was everybody was Catholic. It was not even a question.
Right.
So now, of course, it's completely different. I'd say like 5% go to church, and the church doesn't have as much power, but it still has a lot of people on its side, and can convince a lot of people to go this political direction. So if the media is controlled by the government, they will try uh, to bring them down and like imprison their political power. So they will always attack it. Every now and then they will launch an article against this and in the church. We don't really know why, but because so just so the church remains a bit uh, protective and doesn't go through to political direction too decisively. I think that's like a political way to look at it.
Yeah. So okay. So to rephrase it, so basically they're trying to stifle the church's political stance or political say in the
The public opinion,
yeah,
yeah.
in the public opinion. So they're trying to sway the discourse in a different direction so that the church doesn't have um, the influence that it used to have
Yeah,
before.
I think that's part of it. Yeah. Because as when you see in the United States, the church is starting to become very powerful and very much able to have a political stance and change political decisions and have its own members in the government. So they're scared that this could happen here in Quebec, even though it doesn't seem like it because the church is so fragile now in Canada. But I think they're scared that it could happen, and I believe it can, because a lot of young people are converting and trying to enter history sphere or political sphere, and they're Catholic. So yeah, I think they're scared.
And now in the United States, is it something new? Because I know that atheism is very strong and agnosticism is very strong in the United States, and I wouldn't call the United States the once upon a time faithful country that it used to be.
Hmm.
So is it something new that you're noticing that the Catholic Church or just the church in general, the Christian Church, is starting to become powerful again in the United States?
I think yeah, it started. I think since the 60s and 70s, it like was not really strong, but now since a few decades is starting to really gain some weight and speed, and a lot of bishops are talking and have a political influence. And yeah, and they're very organized and a lot of numbers. And also in the United States, since there are a lot of Protestants,
Yeah.
I think they have sort of a unspoken political alliance that pro-life and everything. So they're very much organized and have really a say. They are numerous enough to have an impact on the political sphere in the United States. So I think the the media's here and the government just doesn't want this to happen here in Quebec.
Interesting, because I think you nicely put your finger on exactly the topic of my master's thesis here,
Yeah.
because I'm focusing on eschatology from a Roman Catholic and evangelical comparative angle. So I'm comparing both denominations, and I'm looking at their theological differences when it comes to eschatology. So the end of the world, the end times, future events, and all that, but also how that plays out in the political sphere. So I look at power players in the United States mostly, on the evangelical and Catholic ends. Now, I was more familiar about the evangelical Christian right in the United States. I took a course on it last winter, 2022, and how like folks like Rushdoony, Jerry Falwell, Robert Jeffers, C. Peter Wagner, all these big players on the evangelical side were basically contributing to the United States politics, for better and for worse.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty sure that's also happening on the Catholic side. So from what you're telling me, like there are players that have taken back some power
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
on the church's behalf in the political arena. So that's super interesting. I'm glad that we're talking about this because that's exactly what my master thesis is going to be about. And so yeah, we talked a lot about the scandals. Now, what about the lack of vocations now? So you mentioned that there was a difference between both. Are is Does one lead to the other, or are they two completely different topics?
Honestly, I don't think so, because if a young man wants to be priest, really wants to be priest, I don't think the scandals that happened like 30 years ago will stop him, because it's not very, for me, it's not very for the present time.
Right.
It happened, and we still like having it on our back, bringing it with us, the weight of what happened, but it's not really like for me it isn't the same, because when I wanted to become priest, I didn't think about the scandals.
Okay.
I think it would be the same for other men who want to become priests. And for the lack of vocation, there are probably a million reasons why there's a lack of priests. But first of all, I think very clearly is because there are not many Catholics
Right.
in Quebec.
We've
For
fallen away from the faith
Yeah,
a long
yeah,
time ago. So
very few families, and that's the thing. Also, people here don't have many children anymore in the family, so meaning less people and less Catholics, and also another topic very important, which I am discovering every day, is the lack of masculinity.
okay.
They young men are very very feminine and effeminate in general in the society here, at least in Montreal. And when if you want to be priest, you have to be a man, a real man. It's not easy. You have to work, and you have to give yourself to 100% for the church and for the people. You have to be a leader. You cannot become priest if you're effeminate. It doesn't work. You will you will uh, you will hit a wall somewhere. If you want to become priest, you have to be masculine and ready to make sacrifice for the church. Jesus says that he is that the church is his wife. He is the husband of the church.
Right.
He's the spouse of the church, and it's the same for a priest. He has to be the spouse of the church. He has to marry the church. When he becomes priest on his ordination, he becomes his husband, his protector, his feeder, his lover, and his giver. So he has to work for the church and provide for her. And it's the same thing in the family, where the husband has to provide for his family and protect his family, and help his wife and his children to become good men and good women. We need men. There is a really masculinity crisis in the society, and of course it impacts the vocation, the priest vocation in the church. I know even Catholics, men, in the church, a lot of Catholic men in the church are very effeminate, and I don't think they could become priests, even if they had a vocation. And yeah, masculinity is very important to become priest.
That's an interesting topic because I wouldn't have thought that masculinity. Obviously, a priest has to be a man in the Catholic Church, and I had,
Yeah.
ironically enough, I'd be contradicting myself a little bit here because episode 14 of Off Bishop Street, for that particular episode, I had a female priest from the Anglican denomination. So I had an Anglican Reverend Carla Holmes, and she was talking about her role as a priest.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't. The thing is, so okay, well, you call yourself a priest? I thought the word was priestess for a woman, but actually they call themselves priests. Just
Yeah.
like some actresses would say that they're an actor, and that the word actress doesn't really exist. And anyway, that becomes like a genderized semantics issue. But yeah, so she was talking about her role as priest, and she never really addressed the issue of femininity or masculinity in that
Hmm.
particular role as a congregation leader, right? And yeah, so I think you're the first person who actually mentioned masculinity as a criterion to being a successful priest.
Yeah.
Um, but because a lot of people will be thinking, well, maybe some priests basically who are not necessarily attracted to the opposite sex would want to become priests in order to, accommodate their own
Hmm.
their own void by becoming a priest. And I never personally I never thought of masculinity being a top
Hmm.
criterion
Hmm.
to be
Yeah,
a priest.
I think it's not only a criteria, it's a life-changing way to live that can impact you to become a priest.
Right.
Uh, if The church is very clear that if you're an homosexual, and even though you don't have any relation, you cannot become priest. You have to, because for the church, it's a problem that you can resolve and you can help to go through, but you have to deal with this first.
Right.
It's you cannot, if you're homosexual, you cannot become priest. It's a very important criteria, because not only does it causes scandal, but also it is. I don't think it's the a man, a really real man doesn't. He has to be clear with this. He has to be attracted to women.
Hmm.
Even priests, it
Right.
has to be clear that they are attracted to women and they're masculine and they're, because the church is like an image of the family and of the natural law, and it 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 respects this in the hierarchy of the family, on in the religious life. So yeah, it's very important, I think, and the church is clear about this.
What you just mentioned is super interesting because it contrasts and it really contradicts a lot of things that Reverend Holmes was
Hmm.
telling me.
Hmm.
Carla, when she sat down a couple of days ago, because she has, I think she has a couple of gay pastors or priests in her in the Anglican denomination. I'm not sure in her church, but in her diocese.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm not sure if we can use the word diocese for. I think we can for Anglicans because Anglicans and she didn't consider herself Protestant. She considered herself
Anglican.
Anglo-Catholic, which would
Yeah.
be Anglican in a
Yeah.
certain sense, which I personally still consider as Protestant in the fact that you have three categories:
Yeah.
Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestant. I just don't make it more complicated than that in my scaffolding of Christianity. Um, so yeah, she does have uh, you know gay clergymen that operate within the clergy. And I, given that I grew up Catholic and now I consider myself more of an overarching Christian, I still have my Catholicity, but it's
Hmm.
just that, I go to evangelical services and I'm open as a theology student. I'm open to a whole bunch of different denominations. I found that weird, just in and of itself, because, and not weird in a bad sense, just weird in a sense that it was so foreign to me
Foreign. Yeah.
to have a homosexual clergyman that I don't know, I didn't know what to make of that.
Yeah. For me, is this is the world that has entered the church. Um, Ordaining women and gay priests is the mind of the world. Is the We are want to go with the world and the flow of the world, and we want to be like the world. It's completely contrary to what Jesus has taught us and the apostles have taught us. We have to be against the world, not in the fighting way, but in the, at least for our personal conversion. We cannot act like the world. We are not. The first Christian. There's the letter to, I don't know in English. Letter to Diogenet.
What's it?
Diogenet. I don't.
Zionet? Okay.
Diogenet. I don't know in English.
Yeah, I don't know what the yeah. Is it an emperor or
No,
like
no. It's a like a first Christian letter to a community,
oh to a community? Okay, yeah, gotcha.
and they say The same way Christians are in the world, the soul is in the body. The soul wants to tell to at least the body wants to force the soul to act in the way the body wants.
Hmm.
The world wants to force the Christian how to the world wants to work. I don't know. I'm sorry, it's very complicated
I find it
for
clear,
me in
yeah, for
English,
sure.
but
Oh, it is clear. Like sometimes the world wants to force the soul or the spirit to submit
yeah.
itself to whatever the tendencies and movements are happening in the world. Whereas the what God wants is for the world to submit itself to godly, spirited
Yeah.
behaviors.
Yeah, and in the Bible it says we are.
By the way,
For,
it's Epistle to Diognetus.
yeah, okay,
It's
epistle title.
the Epistle to Diognetus. It's an interesting letter.
It's a very like a very early Christian. I think the first second century.
Right.
Um, and yeah, we are partly partly a citizen of the world and partly citizen of the of the heaven and of the kingdom of God. So we cannot act like we are only citizens of the world. We have like there is I think I know it's not very clear for a lot of people today, but for me it's very clear that natural law exists and there's a man, a woman, family, between a marriage between men and women, and they have children, and it's the same for the church. Jesus is a man who it was embodied in a man, and he decided to God decided to become a man, to marry the church. Is the different roles. The priest represents Jesus in the church, so for me it's very clear that he has to be a man.
In persona Christi.
Yeah, in
Right. Yeah.
persona Christi. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I know it's a topic very difficult for today's society, but for me, I don't understand. It's
Well, I think what's really spurring up the conflict is just all these gender issues that are brought up in the political sphere. When it comes to gender equality and feminism and all these different social justice movements that are in motion right now. I'm not necessarily against a lot of what they're saying. I am against a good proportion of what they're saying. But there are a couple of things that I do nitpick and understand where they're coming from, and that I do agree with when it comes to feminism or just left leaning movements.
hmm
And that's coming from a guy myself not being left leaning at all. I'm not left leaning. I'm not even right leaning. I think I'm more of a centrist, maybe center right, but mostly centrist in my perspective. Given my conservative upbringing and all that. So because I've had debates and conflict, not conflicts, but disputes with folks on the right and folks on the left, and but just the way that society has been moving, and the way that things have been going around, as you mentioned, like it seems to be the church. The church seems to be submitting to the world instead of the world submitting to. And I hate the word submit, but it seems like that's what's going on. It's church is falling in line with the worldly events and movements. And as a priest, I think it's definitely a priest's role to bring people
yeah,
to the promised land,
yeah,
right? And to help them see the world in the way that they have to be, that has to be seen, and stray away from the debauchery and from
mm,
the demonic forces that are operating in the world.
yeah, exactly. Right. So uh, there's a I don't remember exactly who said this, but I there's a saying that the church it's either the church influences the world or the world influences the church.
Hmm.
And right now, I think the church is being very much influenced by the world. There's always a battle between good and evil, and in, here in Canada, in the church, it's we have to remain very clear about the teaching of the church and the teaching of God and about Christianity, because if we get confused, we're lost. We're lost, and we will do regrettable things. And I think it's very important to stay put, and because we are very in the society in general. We are very confused with everything, and we are, on our cell phones and technology, and we run everywhere with the metro and work, and it's very confusing the world we live in. And I don't think as humans we're used to this. So with the church, it's the same thing can happen and does happen sometimes. Uh, we are being influenced by the world, so that's why the great saints, always teach us to mortify ourselves, meaning that we have to rely only on what is really necessary, and don't eat too much, and don't drink too much, and and don't sleep too much, and just have a sense of equilibre, of a
Balance.
balance,
Yeah.
yeah, right, in your life, so that you remain uh, true to yourself, and to your values, so that you can better yourself. uh, that's what Christian life is always to better yourself throughout time, right? So
I mean, it's kind of like the Japanese notion of kaizen. Having those day by day incremental small improvements that in the end make a huge difference, a
yeah,
very significant difference when it comes to the bottom line.
yeah,
Right.
exactly like that, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And that's why another reason I can give for lack of vocation is because it's difficult. We have a very difficult time today to say that we're not completely free. We cannot do whatever we want and whenever we want. No, we have to enter in a Jacques Rousseau says we are in chains with each other
Right.
in society, because there's the chains of law, and of the bien commun, of common good. And it's the same thing with Christian life. We have, it's difficult. Every day we have to wake up very early to start praying, and do our offices and do mass, and then have to at least in propedeutic we have to study, and then we have our courses, and we have to eat at this time and do this at this time, and we cannot go out whenever we want. And this is something, another reason why there's lack of priests, because many people cannot agree with it, cannot live with the fact that they're not absolutely free every time. That's something very difficult today, and I think it's dangerous with the way people live. Some people will say, "Well, I'm free; I can do whatever I want," but yes, but it's dangerous.
So yeah. So do you believe that there is, and this is going to be a rhetorical question, if there is a perversion of freedom or an
Of
abuse of
course,
freedom in today's world in 2023?
yeah, of course, and that's neoliberalism. Uh, it's like liberalism used to be just getting off barriers so that you could do whatever you want. You have the possibility, and now neoliberalism is forcing you to do whatever you want.
That's weird. Forcing someone, like, you're not even free at that point because you're
It's
forcing.
a perversion of freedom.
Yeah, and it's ironically backwards because if you're forcing someone to be
Then
free
you're no longer free.
more than their, at a higher level of freedom of what their normal freedom to actually be is, that's a new form of tyranny, in my opinion, because you're
Exactly.
forcing them to be free.
Exactly. It's exactly what's
And
happening
it's a
today.
lie when
Yeah,
you
it's
think
a
about
lie.
it. It's
It's
it's a
terrible.
massive lie.
So the freedom God offers us is a freedom we cannot even comprehend. It's a freedom within bounds, because we need bounds. What Adam and Eve did in the how is it called, the jardin, the
Yeah, the Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
is they went outside the bounds that God gave them, and they were no longer free
Hmm.
at that point, because their freedom lies in these bounds of natural law, and of today with the church, of the church laws for Catholic at least. So it's important to not try to destroy everything that exists today. It's a very common thing with anarchism and everything, to try to say we don't have any rules, and we don't like institutions, and we don't need to do what the we can do whatever we want, and we want to destroy everything. We don't need government, and no, we need bounds. It's important. We are human, and we cannot change our nature. We were created like this, and the more we will live with our natural uh, law and the way we were created, the happier we will be. Because today the trend is to even try to change the way we were born, so changing our gender and
Yeah.
everything. So the more we go against what we are, the more we will hate ourselves. And that's why the Christian story and the Christian uh, story of redemption and of the Garden of Evil to the Revelation is something we need to 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 enter eternal life and enter happily and joyfully in in God's life. Right.
Oh yeah, all the different teachings in the Bible are definitely foundational to a more fulfilling life. And I'm hesitant to say the word a happier life because I feel like the word happy is getting tossed around left and right without
Right.
any sensical fortitude
Mm-hmm,
to it.
mm-hmm.
So from Genesis all the way through Revelation, the message or messages of the Bible are definitely key tools for self actualization. And I often go back to the Maslow's pyramid of the needs, right?
Mm-hmm,
When you look at
mm-hmm.
physiological, then security, belongingness, self esteem, and then self actualization. That self actualization to me was when I apply Maslow's pyramid to myself, it was always a form of servitude to something greater than the self. Like self actualization, ironically, is not only actualization of the self, but it's transcending
Mm-hmm.
that particular selfishness that's inherent to every human being and serving something greater. And yeah, I mean, you're 23 years old,
Yeah.
right? And you seem to have touched a level of wisdom that is far beyond the age of 23. A level of wisdom that I didn't have. At 23 years old, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in biochemistry, and my focus was just finding a job, making money, and looking at what the future would hold for me, right? And now I'm wondering, okay, well, Sami Rekik is 23 years old. You're doing your propedeutic, and you know that having had that experience with the Virgin Mary, you know that you want to become a Catholic priest, and
Mm-hmm,
you seem to be very determined.
mm-hmm.
But what does the future hold for Sami Rekik or future father Sami Rekik?
I don't know.
I mean, it's crazy. Like you're 23, the world is at your fingertips right now.
Well, no. Well, it's one day at a time.
Right.
Because if I start to say, oh, in 7 years when I will become priest, I will do this and that, and I will become the, I don't know. And of course, it's not all easy and everything is not. Every day is some struggle and difficult with myself, even to try to. I would like to be perfect right away, but that's not how it works.
Right.
We have to become perfect, of course, in the end with the eternal life, but it's a process, and we have to be patient with ourselves. And one thing I learned that, uh, and I'm still learning, that is helping me a lot, is if God was merciful enough to let Himself be crucified for our sins and for us, we have to be merciful enough with ourselves to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. We have to understand that God has wanted it this way, that we could every day better ourselves and make mistakes and errors and try again. So when I think about all the process, I think it's a very long time before I become priest in 7 years. But I know that I need this time to better myself, and so that when the day comes that I become priest, I am ready, and I have good foundation to guide my people in the world to Christianity, to eternal life. Yeah,
Well, you know what? I think it's a nice place to say amen to that.
right.
And I really admire what yourself and other seminarians are doing, and changing their lives around and opting for that vocation, that calling from God, basically. Like one of our good friends, like Felix Lamontagne,
Mm-hmm.
he's used to be an engineer. I think he did mechanical engineers or something along the lines,
Yeah.
and he dabbled with the Jainism, and he was also going through that spiritual or existential crisis before actually seeing um, or partially seeing Jesus' face,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that seeing Jesus' face and touching Jesus' heart would lead him to choose that path toward the priesthood. And even back in 2018, when I met our good friend, Father Guy Gandon,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very close with him. I've had a lot of important conversations with him about sexual scandals in the clergy, and what's going on in politics right now, and all these all these different existential questions that are so crucial and need to be asked. I've had so many conversations with Father Guy to understand his point of view. Being he being the rector of the Grand Seminary, and back in 2018, I bumped into all these different seminarians. One of them was an electrical engineer from South Korea, turned to the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy from Honduras. I don't remember their names though, but like I know that all these different another guy from Africa. All these different people come from different walks of life, including yourself. And you know, it's interesting to see that there are some guys out there that are finding this vocation. My last question, actually, before we wrap up, is: are you optimistic when it comes to vocations for the priesthood? And if not, like, if there are reasons to be cynical, I'd like to know that too. Like, do you have what would be your outlook for the future of the role of priest, not only in Quebec but in the world?
Right. So I think I think when I think God doesn't send his his young men to become priests in places where they cannot truly become what he wants. I think if the church is not ready to accompany them and guide them and lead them toward priesthood in the way it should be, I think God won't send anyone. But if the church has is ready and wants vocation and wants priests and is hungry for faith and to have a new wind in its dans les voiles, in its
And it's
to
yeah,
have a new wind to push
blacking out, like just and it's sales,
yeah in itself
right?
to it, then God will send vocation with some young priests. I think for now we are in a time where it's difficult, but for the priest, doesn't change his role. It's always the same. It always has been the same, and it will always be the same. The thing that changes is the way he deals with the world. So right now, there's in the churches like this is a very basic semantic, but there's more traditionalist and more modernist people.
Right.
So young men, usually when they convert, they're more on the traditionalist side,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of people who go more on the progressive and modern uh, way. So it's something. I think it's the present battle for the church, the present difficulty, and it will continue to face it for the years to come. It has to do something with. I think the church has to respond to this and to better itself to understand what to do with this two ways that are slowly growing apart in the church. I think that's really the center of the problem right now for vocation. But the I mean, for me, it does. Even though there is this problem, it's a really big problem in the church to understand what to do with this. I stay I stay put. I believe in the heart of Jesus.
I gotta take a picture of this, right?
I speak
Yeah.
with him every day, and I pray every day, and I feel good with this. I
Right.
think
Yeah.
that's the way. I think that's the path to become a good priest. And whatever happens in the church and in the world and everything, we have to stay calm and believe in God and avoir confiance, have
To have trust, to put
trust in Him and confidence in Him.
channel all our trust in the higher power, that being
Yeah,
God,
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. And I really like the way that you the last notion that you ended on. Um, because oftentimes in an overly individualistic, selfish society, people would, take upon themselves uh, the burden or the task to take full control over their life, especially when, they cast God aside, they become atheistic, or people just become so solipsistic in their own means and ways of doing things. Um, it's very burdensome. It leads to sadness, unfortunately, because some things are out of our control. And when
Hmm.
people want to be control freaks and take control of everything, or every single thing that happens in their life, not only is that selfish, but it's just not realistic.
Hmm.
Even for the most pragmatic people. And I really like the way they ended, because oftentimes there are a lot of things that we should just basically take and put in the hands of God and let Him do the work and Him take the reins and take control of certain aspects of life. And I think with time, I'm slowly starting to realize how much of a relief that actually brings to someone's life when you actually allow God to take the steering wheel
Hmm. Hmm.
and direct certain things in life. When it comes to, with myself, right now being single, and when it comes to vocations and knowing who to marry, when to get married, that kind of thing. Like, these are certain things that I don't necessarily have full control
Hmm.
on. I do have a say. I do have to take action, of course, but I think in a certain way, God gets to direct certain things. Like, even just me completing a master's degree in theological studies here, I never thought, like, if you bring back, like, during the pandemic back in 2020 or 2019, like, I never thought I would be doing a master's degree in theological
Hmm.
studies, given my scientific background. And I did biochemistry, and then my ambitions toward doing an MBA, and that door kind of shut because I got refused. I didn't
Hmm.
get into an MBA program, and this was kind of like the plan B. But now I feel like, just in this small thing, this change of circumstances, doing a master's in theological studies to me is more fulfilling than the business diplomas or the science degree that I got. And I feel like a fish in water right
Hmm.
now. So yeah, let's just close it off with some final thoughts.
Yeah. So I think God, whatever we want is never as good as what God wants for us. And I've realized this many times over and over again. And I always have an idea of what I would like to happen and everything, but always I get frustrated at first when it doesn't happen, and then God shows me what He really wanted for me. It's a thousand times better than what I expected. So yeah, I think we have if people who listen are not Christian and don't really know what to do with the question of God and of Christianity or church, just be calm at first, and just take time to read and take time to think. Blaise Pascal used to say he said, if everybody could take at least an hour sitting and doing nothing, then the world will be saved.
Really? Yeah, I'd really like to delve into that, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of philosophical depth to that statement. Even though I might need to think and wrap my head around, not doing anything and understanding how that actually improves the world. But yeah, I definitely understand that meditation, and sometimes being sitting alone
Yeah.
isn't necessarily sitting alone, because God is sitting there with you.
So it doesn't even say like pray or meditate. No, just say stays there and do nothing.
Yeah,
Because we are always doing something, and we cannot, especially today with the phones, we cannot sit and think for 1 second. We
right.
always are doing something. And I'm still a very beginner at this, but I'm trying to have sometimes to just do nothing and relax and really not have my phone or anything, but just be there and think. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Sammy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I had a blast. Just, you're the first Catholic seminarian
Ah, yeah.
that I've had on. I mean, obviously, Reverend Carla Holmes is an Anglican priest, but someone from the Catholic background. I've had Catholics on the show, but someone with your vocation and the level of youth vitality that you bring to the table is absolutely tremendous. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And this was it for episode 15, guys. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I really enjoy doing these podcast sessions, because I try to bring a lot of interesting people to the table, and thus far I haven't failed at bringing interesting people onto the podcast. And everybody has their different take and perspective and specialty and expertise and walk of life to share. And on that note, stick around for more. Not sure who the next guest will be, but I'll definitely keep you guys posted with further guests and other interesting conversations to be had. All right. So thank you so much, and until next time, cheers.